I would like to start by thanking the Richard Laws Foundation and the Dartington Cattle Breeders Trust for their sponsorship of this journey, to the Nuffield team for their help throughout, and to Kite. Kite have been an absolute force for good in the dairy industry for the past 20 years. And the way that they've led in the antibiotic resistance arena is great evidence of exactly that. So for my travels, I visited America, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Ireland, Italy, India, plus many meetings online throughout. I really want to stay positive with my messages. Sometimes this is pretty hard when the topic that you're investigating is literally described as an apocalypse, but I really think this is important because this is how action gets done. If we're going to drive meaningful change, it needs to be built on an optimistic vision for the future. As we enter into a debate around the future path that UK agriculture takes, positivity is key. So antibiotic resistance. I want to promise you that this is one of the most fascinating topics out there. It sits right at the heart of human and animal health. It is intertwined into economics, ethics, justice. It asks us questions about who we are as an industry and as a society. But there is this risk that following the coronavirus epidemic, we become slightly desensitized to health information and statistics. We need to remember that there is a huge human cost to antibiotic resistance. Both in this country and abroad, tens of thousands of people lose their lives to it. The uncomfortable truth is that we don't yet know what drives individual farm resistance. At a national level, as antibiotic use falls, resistance probably comes down as well, but the science is not perfect and it likely will never be. It's not helpful to play blame games, attempting to cast either human medicine or animal agriculture as the primary cause of this crisis. Instead, we must share the responsibility for finding its solution. In my view, if there is even a remote chance that agriculture can create a path to resistance in the human population, we've got to do all we can to mitigate this. So I said I'd be positive, and I'm really glad on my travels I found some absolutely fantastic examples of what we need to be doing. In Ireland, I was really grateful to visit the Western Brand Group. They are the largest family-owned broiler producer in the country, and they worked right throughout their supply chain, focusing on the quality of animals that they brought into their flocks, the environment in which they were kept, and the nutrition that they were fed. There are a lot of differences between the poultry and dairy industries, but there are lessons that can be learned and transferred directly across. You know, individual farmers can work on these areas and really seize the opportunity of these new technologies and findings. In the Netherlands, I spoke with government officials and lobbyists who are probably, they're probably about 5 years ahead of us on their journey towards reducing antibiotic use. They enacted a countrywide benchmarking system for farmers and vets. Their rapid and unified actions allowed them to understand their current situation and then to target high users much early on in the process. I'm really pleased that we are finally creating a national benchmarking system for ruminants in the UK, and every farmer and processor around the country needs to get on board with this as soon as possible to help put this issue to bed. You know, right now in the UK, about half of all antibiotics are used on just a quarter of farms. Those farmers need our help. And I say help because this shouldn't be about punishment. It's been great working with some supermarkets and to go and meet these high antibiotic users and figure out exactly what's going on. It's a different thing on every farm. Some have diseases that they are struggling with. Others are using drugs as a safety blanket for historic issues that might not even be around anymore. Bespoke assistance to individual high users will help reduce dairy antibiotic use. What's more, this new benchmarking should form part of a wider shift towards transparency within the dairy supply chain. This notion that holding on to information on farm preserves its value is absolute nonsense. Researchers I met talked about information asymmetry, so barriers that stop people knowing what's really happening. This lack of transparency helps devalue milk. It commoditizes it. It prevents us showing all the good that we do. It means that milk from both good and bad farms is merged together. It's not differentiated in any way. High quality farms should set the benchmark against which other farms are judged. This is how farmers capture the full value of their data and their milk. So in America, you know, I think one of the really powerful things about these Nuffield scholarships is that it gives you the opportunity to compare different farming systems. And when I first got here, I was really impressed by their extension services and the knowledge within the universities. I was shown such a warm welcome by all the farmers throughout the country. The more time I spent there, however, I began hearing stories of environmental and personal costs of farming in the US. There is supposed to be this free market system out there, but it led to really poor coordination of environmental policies and financial models that were skewed towards bigger, lower margin businesses. Researchers were absolutely despairing that the science that they created never stood a chance of being put into policy. I heard stories of cattle being kept on antibiotics their entire life because the margins within the industry were so tight that producers couldn't afford not to. Now, while this is often described as like a disease prevention, it's just a sticking plaster over a fundamental problem of their market. And as I traveled around the country, I met farmers who were paying the price for this. From Texas to Wisconsin, farmers were trapped in ever faster spinning economic cycles. In Pennsylvania, I visited Mennonite communities where farmers who had been cornerstones of that community were being forced out of business. There is this story we tell ourselves within the dairy industry that tightening margins will force inefficient farmers out of business. There is this rising tide of productivity which will allow good farmers to float and force poor farmers to sink. But the trouble with that you're placing such faith in the market, and we don't have an economic system that takes into account any form of environmental damage. This is the concept of negative externalities, where the market doesn't include certain emissions or pollution. Antibiotic use works in very much the same way. These drugs are cheap and very effective. The science shows that in response to tightening margins, farmers will look to decrease their risk. They do this by increasing their antibiotic use, treating animals just in case, as the financial consequences of losing an animal are just too high. This was such an important realization to me, that the very mechanism we are relying on to decrease antibiotic use may actually do completely the opposite. Milk churns became a bit of a symbol for me on my travels. They're a symbol of the other way of doing things. They represent a different way of making milk. But don't worry, I'm not suggesting we go back to this way of farming, but both in India on the left and Switzerland on the right, they have created financial frameworks which recognize that farming achieves far more than just the production of food. In India, they have a very inefficient industry structure, but it's because they're wanting to create as many jobs as possible that the milk churns are hand delivered all across the country. And while they present their own challenges in terms of food safety, they allow rural communities to feed into a huge food network that feeds cities and in turn provides jobs and income to those most in need. In Switzerland, the mountains are covered in these small dairies, creating high-value mountain cheese. Each valley flavors its milk with a unique blend of herbs and grasses. And when I speak to Swiss people, they understand that their slightly higher food costs allow for a way of farming that focuses far more on environmental harmony than pure productivity alone. Klaas Kachel, who is an absolutely fascinating antibiotic historian I spoke with, says that we are where we are because of a long history of regulatory failures. What he means is that this didn't start recently. This history extends back decades. Resistance doesn't impact the earth like biodiversity collapse or climate change drugs. Drugs are used by humans for the benefit of humans. But at their core, each of these big issues comes down to the same elements. They are equally political and economic in their solution. We are going to need to make active choices to solve these issues. But the great thing is that we can make active choices to solve these issues. Food and farming are political levers pulled by every single country around the world. Now, traditionally, ours is a government and an industry that likes a hands-off approach. But doing nothing is as much of an active choice as any other system. We can choose to create a food and farming system that is intertwined into the health of both our people and our planet. The challenge of antibiotic resistance should act as a mirror. reflecting back on ourselves, no matter which role we play within the industry, asking us, where are our responsibilities? What type of food and farming system do I want to create? If I had to distill my whole project down into 3 concepts, it would be this: action. We can all take actions right now that make financial sense, that make strategic sense. We need to get them done. Value. We should seek higher value whenever possible. Commodities are the enemy of meaning. Let's push to go in the other direction. And leverage. Each of us must use our leverage, whatever groups or boards we sit on, through any votes we get. Let's push for the scales to be rebalanced. Let's push to make these positive, progressive choices together. When I began this journey, I was so convinced that efficiency was right at the heart of progressive agriculture, and that it was the very key to a successful future on this planet. I now see that the reality is far more nuanced and messy, but I do see a positive way to go, and I really look forward to it. Thank you.